Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Here on AIM, we invite industry professionals and subject matter experts on to discuss current trends and technology topics. Today, we will be discussing cloud and hybrid IT with Dell Technologies. With me today is Chris Laffey, Field CTO from Dell Technologies. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, Chris. How are you?
Getting more and more confused as the quarantine continues.
Yeah, I hear you. The COVID response is sometimes insanity and being dumbfounded. We're fighting through it here as well.
So, in order to get started, do you mind just giving a real quick personal background? Tell us where you came from, how you ended up at Dell, that sort of thing.
Sure. So I've been in IT for a little over the last 30 years up here in New England. I started out in a regional consulting firm doing implementation and training. Like to tell people that my first real job in IT was writing Windows 3 manuals back in the late 80s. Since then, kind of evolved with the industry over time. And one of the things that I really enjoy about that evolution is that as you evolve with an industry, you're able to define a lot of the trends and see the circular nature of how some things happen. Helps you see where things are going as to, history repeating itself and so forth.
Sure.
Did everything from, data center management and administration, software companies, was an MCT for a long period of time, about 13 years. I came to Dell Technologies through kind of a side door. I started working for VCE, which was the organization that invented converged infrastructure. Started working there in about 2013. And since then have kind of evolved through a number of different roles in the organization from Channel SE, was a global go-to-market specialist with responsibilities for driving our go-to-market for VxRail and the vertical cloud offerings for a couple of years. And then about 6-8 months ago, stepped into the field CTO role, which is really just providing strategic leadership and engagement between our customers and, customers that require a higher level of engagement and executive sponsorship, here in the commercial East region.
So that gives you a pretty wide berth and understanding about some trends and things that are going on out in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's cool. Like I was saying, you see patterns, you see trends. It's funny. I know we're going to be talking about cloud here, and what's happened in the cloud over the last few years is really on trend with the pendulum that swings between centralized and decentralized compute. And we've watched that pendulum go back and forth and, has about a 5 or 6 year cycle from what we see. And, cloud adoption has really kind of followed that. We started to swing pretty heavily towards centralizing on the cloud. And, now we're starting to see that pendulum start to swing back with the repatriation of workloads, hybrid cloud, giving people more control over how they're operating in a cloud-like model, private cloud on-prem, and really that shift from, we want to be out of the data center business, move everything out to the cloud, to the understanding that it's going to be a landscape. And that landscape is going to, have to be navigated in new ways. And the decisions are going to have to be made really based around workload and what those workload requirements are. And that navigation isn't just simply, hey, I'm going to move my data center to, AWS or Azure. It really is stateful, and it really is a combination of strategies. So it's been interesting to watch. People like to jump on that shiny new object and kind of burst out, but it's not always that, simple or that controllable. It really does take a lot of time and effort to get to that point.
Right. And it's also a certain amount of practicality. People are very excited about the cloud when it's a brand new thing. But then as their understanding of the capabilities and in certain cases the costs become clear, it makes a lot more sense to sort of split the workload, if for no other reason than you have geographical spread, right?
Yeah. And I think that economic piece is a really big part of it. I thought that, I think when we started to look at cloud adoption, people really thought that it was going to be less expensive to drive everything out to the cloud. But as you start to get some sprawl, and the way that I like to explain it is the cloud ends up being kind of like a mushroom field. You put your foot in it and people start doing things. All of a sudden there's an explosion, not only of workloads that are going out there, but of data that's out there as well. And, that data gravity issue is costful. That sprawl ends up adding, a good deal of cost. And what people really want is, control over cost. So, we're starting to see a different understanding of what that financial impact is and a different understanding of how to operate. Another large piece of that is, what happens when you do have to repatriate workloads. There's not only a cost for entering the cloud, there's a cost for exiting the cloud. Not only in finance, with companies charging for egress costs, but also in time. You think if you've got let's say, 10 or 15 terabytes even at a cloud location, you start to pull that down, that's not going to be immediate. That download time is going to take days, sometimes weeks, and that impacts business agility. So I think there is a lot of corner impacts and, corner consequences that are now becoming apparent to some organizations that weren't really apparent when they first started doing the evaluation or first started doing the migration.
What are some of the strategies you're seeing companies look at to implement in order to get around those types of limitations or concerns that they have?
One of the things around data sprawl is really, we work with what we call a near cloud storage partner, and the company's called Faction, and we do Dell Technologies near cloud storage with them. And that's one of the ways to get your data very close to cloud locations. They have their data center set up, with really close round trip operations or round trip time between their locations and the cloud data centers. This kind of does three things that are really important, and it controls that financial piece, right? Because it's a colo and more of a near cloud rather than true hyperscale cloud, the ingress and egress costs to them are controlled. The second thing that it does is it allows to leverage the best of breed nature of each one of the cloud providers. And let me explain what I mean by that. Just like every software company or every hardware company has strengths and weaknesses, things that they do really well that are very attractive, cloud providers do the same. One may be really, really strong in AI ML, another may be really strong in transactional databases, another may be really strong in DevOps. And what companies are looking to do is to leverage those best of breed microservices and that best of breed architecture with their data. By utilizing near cloud storage, it allows you to basically, take that best of breed nature from each one of those cloud providers without having to swing your data between them on a regular basis. This allows for a lot of business agility, and this allows for, taking advantage of exactly what you want from each one of the cloud vendors without, really getting locked in and without having that really heavy data cost. Another thing that we see organizations doing is really leveraging hybrid cloud. And, it's not just us that's driving the hybrid cloud messaging, or not just, VMware or VCF on VxRail, whatever the case may be. You start to look at what these hyperscalers are doing, people like, Google with Anthos and Microsoft with, Azure Stack and Arc, and AWS with Outposts. They're starting to realize that the customers really like the architecture. They like the microservices piece. They like the cloud native piece, but they want control over where those workloads are going to land and how they're going to land out there. What we want to do is we want to provide that management orchestration and automation piece that's, really cloud strength in that cloud operating model, and pull that down on-prem. Give the data center staff and, the IT staff the ability to, KPI and fingerprint their workloads, say, all right, this is something that can live in the cloud. This is something that has to live on-prem, whether for compliance or IP reasons, whatever the case may be, but allow them to make that decision. Another thing that comes from that near cloud storage, that third piece, is, that well-connected piece, knowing that your applications that are going to say require high levels of throughput with data and high data accessibility, you can control that connectivity, you can control that data location. When we're talking about hybrid cloud and having that control plane brought back down on premises for people, we're allowing them to control where the application is going to live, how well connected it's going to be to the data, and making sure that their applications, which is really the bottom line here, are running cleanly, or have the access that they need, but also have that security control and compliant nature that they need as well.
Right. So let's take that piece by piece. We'll start from the top and work our way down. I think that you made a great point that people don't necessarily always understand that different cloud providers have different strengths and weaknesses, especially as new hardware is rolled out. Like, for example, there was a report I saw last year that Google was the fastest when it came to network throughput for reasons that people can't completely understand. And yet for long-term storage, Amazon was winning. Those numbers and those technology vendors might flip-flop in 2020. We have no idea, really. But if your business is running at those levels where that really matters, then having the ability to split the workload between the two with something like the near line cloud that you were talking about makes a lot of sense.
It's also one of the things that's really cool. And if you watch, the two things that really seem to be the areas of competition for these hyperscalers are, the speed of processor and the processor density. And if you watch the development, kind of cycle, you'll see that they are really chasing each other to be, the most dense, the most powerful from a processor standpoint. And another area that's really critical within, their portfolios are the microservices that they develop and the microservices that they can apply to these applications and workloads. AWS had a pretty good head start on the development, but we see, both Microsoft and Google continuing to develop microservices at a rapid rate as well, and expanding what they can offer and the strengths that they can offer to customers. And that's a big piece, is that cloud evolution, or that microservices evolution. You may be running something in Amazon or AWS today because, they had the fastest processors, or they had, the most robust microservices available. But as that landscape shifts and change, you may need to leverage something from another one of these hyperscale vendors. And having that mobility, having that agility to go from one cloud vendor to another starts to be really important, because we always want the best outputs. We always want the best solutions. We always want to make sure that we're doing the best things for our internal and external customers. Having that agility and that ability to bounce between clouds, isn't really there on a regular basis, because there's no cross connectivity between them. It's not like I can build a container in Amazon with, RDS services or whatever the case may be, and then move it over to Azure and take care of their, database services, which are, one of the strengths for Azure. We need to provide a way to slingshot those. And that's one of the really cool things with utilizing a hybrid cloud with something like a VMware cloud on AWS or a VSV in Azure. It really does give you the ability to slingshot these workloads from one cloud vendor to another by pulling it back down on-prem and then reporting it to a different cloud location. These are things that weren't widely thought of or widely developed maybe 3 or 5 years ago, but are really becoming some of the backbone of what customers are looking for and what these advanced cloud customers are looking to accomplish.
I think if a customer was intelligent about the cloud and they were aware of the differences between the two or the three clouds, they would think to themselves, I should move from AWS to Google or AWS to Azure, but really not have the tool set that would work in between to easily make that happen. Whereas this really gives them that bridge, and also gives them an interface that is consistent. So you don't have to be an expert on the Azure portal and the Google portal and the AWS portal in order to get these types of advantages for your workloads.
And that's another great point. When we talk about the different cloud models, it's not just like different operation model. It's a different cloud costing model, management interface. There are different ways to get from point A to point B when you go from vendor to vendor. And we may not always have the DNA or the understanding to be able to jump from interface to interface or from vendor to vendor very quickly. And we've term that I really don't like in the industry, but people talk about a lot is that single pane of glass. And what I like to really lean on there is the authoritative dashboard, the ability to have one place that simplifies the management and takes the complexity out of this type of work. And the cool thing when you talk about VMware Cloud and you talk about Virtual Cloud Foundation from VMware and the things that we're doing with the Dell Technologies cloud platform and so forth is not only are we providing that authoritative dashboard that allows people to span across multiple clouds, but it's vCenter. It's vSphere. It's the things that we've been doing for a long period of time. So it really trims that learning curve down, and it really takes out some of the complexity in the deployment, in the long-term management, and in the lifecycle management of all of these systems.
Right. And it gives an administrator a tremendous amount of confidence that they're not going to have to relearn something every single time they switch from one service provider to another.
Right. And, and we see this even on-prem, right? When you look at what people are doing as they experiment with private cloud on-prem and they start to go through building a new stack, this isn't something that we've developed a tremendous amount of DNA around where, we can go ahead and spin up a Docker, Rancher, Farmer, OpenShift, OpenStack, get to that Kubernetes dial tone, work with all of the different, automation vendors, work with all the different orchestration vendors, and then, assemble this whole stack. That's something that's been relatively new in our world. So people are really working hard to build that muscle. People are working hard to get to the point where this is, simpler and replicatable and all of these things. What we want to do, and what I think has been really cool about the development and all the recent developments with VMware and Project Pacific and Project Tanzu, the integration of cloud native workloads being able to be managed and maintained in under that single framework is we're providing organizations the agility to get to that Kubernetes dial tone and start to build on top of that. But we're doing it within a framework that they're comfortable with and that they understand. And being able to run a workload on one side with traditional VMware or what we like to call hybrid workloads now when we are working with a hybrid cloud on a single workload domain and have another workload domain next to it that is really been spun up, as Kubernetes native, PKS, but having it under the same cluster really does unify things and it simplifies things, but it's doing it in a way that we've already have a lot of history with and that we have a lot of understanding with. So there's a level of comfort there and there's a level of simplicity there that, is really important going forward. But there's also a unification that's important. What we hear a lot around a lot of organizations that we're talking to now. It's funny. I was just talking to a bank last week. I've talked to a couple of state CTOs recently. We're hearing the same things over and over again. We want to simplify our management. We don't want to have to go from element manager to element manager to element manager to manage server network storage, virtualization and, applications, all the rest of it. We want to have a simplified way to look at this and to consume it, instead of having to go all over the place. And that unification is really important as a part of the journey, not only from the 3-tier architecture that we're used to into more of a software-defined, converged or hyper-converged world, but it is around getting that speed and business agility for both traditional workloads and cloud-native workloads. I love this evolution. I've had an opportunity, as I had mentioned a few minutes ago, I had responsibility for go-to-market for VxRail and the vertical cloud offerings for a couple of years. And watching how the teams the engineering teams came together from, at the time it was Pivotal, VMware, the VxRail BU, and our engineering teams and so forth. And we all sat down and very quickly pulled together a core team to do the development to integrate Pivotal Container Service directly into VCF. Doing all that work and watching that stuff get assembled, and then watching the evolution as to, VMware purchasing Pivotal and bringing them in as a larger part of their organization. And then all of the work that was done to go, from that point to where we are now with vSphere 7 and, Project Tanzu being able to do all of these things was really kind of cool. When I talked about the evolution of going from VCE into EMC into Dell Technologies that we were talking before this call started, one of my concerns was, how are we going to remain agile, and how are we going to maintain our velocity and our speed for releases and the evolution that we were driving around HCI, software defined in cloud? What I found was that the unification underneath this umbrella of these organizations really became a differentiator in the industry and across the competitive landscape, because we're able to tie things together at a roadmap level, at a very low level, and make sure not only is the development of any one of these independent products being tended to and being looked at, but all of these products and their development timeline being unified really makes something powerful. We talk about the lifecycle management and the ability to do a single click upgrade from the top of the software stack all the way down through firmware BIOS and so forth. The reason why nobody in the industry can do it in the way that we do it is because we are aligned at an engineering level, and we're not cobbling a stack together with a bunch of hardware compatibility lists saying, we know if you start off on day one with this ref arc or this system that's on our HCL that you're going to be okay. It's really driving day 2 plus operations and really driving that compliance state and that lifecycle management and that simplicity that really nobody else can provide. But watching that evolution from, these different, aggregated parts into a single system and a single holistic outcome was really important, and it was actually really cool.
Sure. And I think it brings up a great point, which is the technology in and of itself is cool, and everybody's always glad to see something new and fun and exciting in their data center as a proof of concept. But really the power and the value that it brings to a business is, what does it look like on day 2? What does it look like on day 10? What does it look like on day 75? If it's not that kind of simplicity, if it's not that kind of holistic view of the entire environment, what's going to happen is people are just going to stop using it.
Well, this is why HCI came around, right? When you think about, the way HCI hit the market space, the reason why, and it's kind of funny when you look at the cloud evolution and the HCI evolution are so tied together now, because, they did kind of hit the market space at the same time, and they did kind of balloon at the same time, but it really was around, unifying the workloads, going from a 3-tier complex stack to going to a 1-tier automated simplified stack. And the recurring theme across, all of this is simplification. Simplification drives agility. We know that the more complex your environment is, the harder it is to manage and maintain. I was talking a couple of minutes ago about the pendulum that swings back and forth. That's one of the constants, that stayed throughout my whole career. The other constant that stayed throughout my whole career has been, the more that you standardize, the more that you look the same from piece to piece to piece to piece, the easier your environment is to manage, the easier your environment is to maintain. And when you talk about cloud agility and cloud simplicity, a lot of it is not having to do so many tasks and getting rid of some of the, low value tasks, keeping the spinnies and blinkies going, keeping the lights on. So the more that we automate, the more that we simplify, and the more agile we become, the easier it is for our customers to serve their customers. And more importantly, the more time we're giving back to the organization for innovation and driving business outcomes, instead of just being mechanics.
Right. Let's let the VX Rail handle the upgrades and the versions and the code and all that stuff,
Hmm.
and focus on business itself.
Correct. And look, for the first time in industry, IT is really being leaned on as a business driver, as a business generator. We were always considered to be a cost shop, right? We were draining costs from the business. We had to pull teeth for money. We kind of keep them in the back and feed them pizza guys, but we were always considered to be an expense. Now, more and more, organizations are relying on IT to drive business outcomes that are impactful to their bottom line. You look at the gig economy, for example. That's all cloud-based. That's all compute-based. That's all being run by the people on the back end to facilitate the whole business. I love talking about monolithic industries. Banking is a great example. I've been spending a lot of time with a number of banks, both large and small up here. You think about the way we've always done business with a bank and the way that it's changed over the last 5 years. I mean, I haven't been into the branch of a bank for about 3 years, right? If I need money, I'm pulling it out of an ATM or I'm paying things with my debit card. If I need to check my balance, I'm doing it on my phone or my computer. I need to deposit a check, I'm taking a picture of it and I'm auto depositing it. But all of these different pieces are all IT based. They're all new ways to serve a customer with technology rather than traditional brick and mortar environments. And we're seeing that evolution across all industries, especially now. And you were talking about, being a victim of the quarantine, right? We're seeing a huge change in the way people are doing their jobs. We've gone from being in offices very quickly to having to serve people from a work from home environment. And it's driven a lot of change and it's driven a lot of panic, and people are trying to respond very quickly. The things that we go back to with this is that business agility that the cloud or these types of scalable solutions provide, is being able to rapidly respond to whatever the needs of the customers are. So we've seen things like desktop as a service, VDI in the cloud, larger presence for VDI on-prem, VPN concentrators and VPN delivery models, application publishing. There's a lot of different ways to get to the point to make sure people are maintaining productivity. But this was something that a lot of companies wouldn't have even considered 6 months ago. And now we have, whole workforces that have been moved from in office to out of office. Being able to respond and being able to pivot and rejigger what we're doing very quickly, it's huge. And the burstability, the elasticity, and the simplicity that of all of these solutions that we're talking about, that ability to auto scale, that ability to scale either in a linear or nonlinear fashion up and out, really does provide the engine for the solutions that are necessary in this unprecedented time, if I can repeat the term I think everybody in the world's using.
Yeah, and I think that what we're seeing is the next level of that flexibility, right? We already got a major advantage in the world of just basic hyper-converged on-prem. Forget the cloud for a second. If you needed to expand, say, a VX Rail, within limitations, you could just buy another node, plug it in. All of that capacity now becomes available. Everything resettles itself and you're done. It's a whole world of difference between that and, I have to go buy a new SAN. I have to get 15 new servers. I have to get them all configured. It's effectively plug and play.
It is, and it's automation. And at the core of what we're doing in the cloud, and at the core of what we're doing hybrid cloud and on-prem and HCI and the whole thing, is it's simplicity, it's speed, it's automation. It's that automation orchestration piece that really is the backbone of all of this. I mean, if you weren't able to leverage something in AWS like auto scaling, or if you weren't able to drive the automation that allows for that elasticity and that burstability of workloads, the value of AWS would be degraded to a good deal if you weren't able to leverage the automation pieces that both things like VxRail Manager and VCF and SDDC Manager provide us on-prem. We would lose a good deal of our value and our differentiation in the industry as well. That simplicity, that replicability, that scalability, that burstability, these are all at the core what people are looking for and what the outcomes they need to facilitate are being pinned on.
Right. And can you talk a little bit about, let's go from bottom to top in terms of the actual stack that an organization would have from hardware to software in a hybrid cloud deployment like we've been talking about?
So in a build your own type environment, there are many different ways that you can get there. You'll have your defined stack, whether that's, vSAN or VxFlex, or there are several different ones that are out there that give you the foundations. And then as you go up the stack, now you're starting to talk about you need an operating system. The biggest difference between a hypervisor and, these cloud-based operating systems is that a hypervisor is providing you a platform to put in multiple operating systems in and of itself. These cloud operating systems really are providing you a foundation where you can share the services that they provide without you having to build really deep, really fat kind of machines where all of the services are provided by an operating system on, virtual machine to virtual machine. These container-based or Kubernetes-based or whichever, flavor people are using are really, looking at a single operating system that's sharing those microservices across the containers, but those containers are much thinner and smaller. So once you make a decision on what container-based operating system that you're going to utilize, you then kind of have to think about what the end user is going to interact with. Is it, ServiceNow? Is it vRealize Automation? Or once again, there are many out there. Then there has to be kind of the automation pieces, whether it's a Chef or a Puppet. There are different ways that you can get there. And then you're going to use something like a Terraform, and that's going to be that orchestration piece that does the transformation between all of the requests and, driving it into whatever its final state is going to be, physical, virtual, or container. When you look at it from a composed stack, now we're starting to talk about things like VCF, and you have vSphere, vSAN, and then the VCF stack with NSX and automation, and then you've got SDDC Manager taking care of the lifecycle management of the software stack. And then you can have other flavors or depending on what outcome you're looking to drive, like, Horizon for VDI or, PKS for that container-based infrastructure. The difference between the two of them is kind of really simple, right? When you're dealing with a composed stack, there are a lot of decisions that have to be made around interoperability, what people are comfortable with, what people are familiar with. So it doesn't become, kind of a science project. You want it to be something that people are comfortable with interacting on, that you have some skills and talent, that you have that muscle built around it, that, you've bought into or your people have bought into so that they understand what they're doing. But when you're talking about the composed stack with something like, VCF on VxRail or the Dell Technologies cloud platform, now you're talking about a fully integrated and automated stack back to that engineering piece and that stitching piece. And we're able to do it in a much simpler, more repeatable and predictable outcome because it is something that's so prescribed and locked down together.
Yeah, and it sounds like it would be something a little bit more on the turnkey side so that engineering doesn't have to be focused on the technology itself. It can, again, be focused on business outcomes.
Yeah, less complex. And that's really, from the second we started talking about converged infrastructure and hyperconverged infrastructure in the data center, one of the primary pieces was to drive complexity out and drive simplicity in.
Right. And getting back to the situation that we find ourselves in, that simplicity really, really helps for customers that were in the position to take advantage of it. The working from home requirements went from zero or a small amount of the workforce to all of the workforce all at once.
Yeah, and look, the impact that this is having isn't only on data center based organizations, it's also on these hyperscalers, right? Because they're now reaching capacity, and they're, you have to remember there's pieces to the puzzle that are as important as the compute stack and the storage stack, and that's that network and bandwidth piece. And it's internal to organizations, but it's also external. And with the amount of traffic that's been generated by everybody working from home, first of all, I've been really impressed by the core infrastructure that we're running on, that we were able to facilitate and absorb such a massive shift from on-prem workers to at-home workers with not too much of an impact. But when you look at the requirements for one of these hyperscalers to run and for them to operate efficiently, they need that bandwidth, they need that throughput, they need that depth. They're more reliant on it than pretty much anybody else. And they've been impacted just by the amount of volume, and just by the that mass shift from office workers to remote workers. And everybody's kind of dealing with the same thing right now. We're all just trying to make sure that we're providing the capacity, that we're providing the supply chain and supply chain management, and being as responsive as we can to customers that are in the most need. I will say this. One of the things that I've been very proud of this organization and very proud of our leadership has been the way that we've leaned into communities in this time. Not only our internal communities and the way that they, showed leadership and shown us the kind of path to execution, but also when you look at Michael's foundation, donating, $100 million, him forgoing his salary, the number of things that we are doing, not only to protect our own employees, but to protect our community and maintain the communities when they're struggling. The amount of donations that we've done of gear to school systems and hospitals and so forth it's been kind of cool. You get into these tough times. I think Mr. Rogers said it best. His mom told him that when things are going bad, you look for the helpers.
Right.
And in times like these, looking for people that are leading with their feet, the people that are willing to run in rather than run away, are really the ones we want to emulate, and the ones that we want to make sure that we're, expressing gratitude to.
It's just a reminder that as a society, we really are all in this together. So anything that anybody can do, especially like that level of charity and focus on society, deserves recognition.
I agree. So don't mean to go sidetrack there, but something I think is important to remember during the pandemic and the quarantine is there are ways that we can all step up our game and continue to contribute and give back in unique ways.
I think this also brings up a good point, that a lot of the technology stuff that has been talked about, people could be listening to this and saying, oh, that doesn't apply to me. My company's not big enough. I don't need that. I'm not a multi-billion-dollar organization. Especially around the way that cost has been broken down to really bite-sized chunks, as it were. There's a solution in here for everybody, from a small business all the way up to a large business.
It's funny you say that. Helping small businesses and making sure that small businesses continue to operate, is important. They're the backbone of our society and a lot of what we do. My sister owns a gym, and she only has probably 10 or 15 employees, but they serve a large number of customers in the community. Educating her staff on how to do classes via Zoom sounds like something that would be relatively small, but this isn't, an organization that requires a huge work from home presence, but now it requires a large distributed presence. We used to look at things like virtualization, and people were like, oh, I'm too small to virtualize. I only have, 5 or 10 servers. And then when they learned that they could run their whole environment on 2 or 3 servers, and that server consolidation piece does have impact to the bottom line, we saw people evolving to new models. No matter what the organization is producing or what the outcome that they're looking to drive is, there are technology examples and ways that we can help them, go from point A to point B and in, a pretty simple, pretty cost efficient time frame. Instead of thinking I'm not big enough to consume, or this doesn't apply, you always look for where positives can apply and what we can do to make ourselves a more efficient, a little leaner, have a differentiated outcome when we get to the back end of things like this.
And if absolutely nothing else, get your backups off site.
Yeah, and have them air gapped. Make sure that they're not accessible by hackers if they get into your network. Part of that is data protection. Part of that is business continuity. Part of that is how do we protect ourselves against some of the things that are becoming so prevalent, and data hijacking and people hacking and ransomware and all the rest of it, unfortunately, has been something that we need to prepare for and prepare against. And making sure that that randomization of connection, that air gap between your backup system and your production environment, that has become a larger piece of this landscape. And the cool thing about the opportunity that we have here as Dell Technologies, and being a leader in so many different areas, is that we get to integrate those into our larger solutions. So, being able to work with things like, our data protection, integrated data protection appliance, IDPA, data domain, and data domain virtual edition, and the virtual editions, software-based editions of our backup softwares within a hyper-converged environment, really does complete that picture and allows us to address, a larger part of the landscape than, having to once again continually cobble systems on to the back that may add complexity or may add depth of spend, or that IT debt that we're always talking about. Just like we and our partners at Anexinet are doing, is we're providing end-to-end solutions for our customers, and it really doesn't matter the size of the customer or the depth of need. What it really is coming out with a simplified and differentiated outcome on the back end. So I think that there's a conversation that can be had with organizations of any size that can help them develop a more unified or differentiated solution as we come out of this.
So one thing that did come out a little more quietly, I think, than Dell Technologies would have preferred is vSphere 7.0 got general release. Do you want to just take some time to talk about that, particularly its strengths in regards to the hybrid cloud?
Yeah, it really has to do with two things. We hear a lot about refactoring applications. We hear about a lot about refactoring platforms to be, more cloud native. And, the cool thing is that VMware's never rested on their laurels, and they're always looking for new ways to integrate and develop. And this refactoring really does drive us to a more container-based world, just like the rest of the world is going to. But it provides us with some simplicity and some efficiencies that come from running in this fashion. And it's also going to help us to be more agile in development of features, and in the speed and velocity which we're able to do development CD on a regular basis. But that primary outcome of having hybrid workloads, your traditional VMware workloads running alongside cloud native, Kubernetes based workloads, that agility is really massive. And that's where I really see a large differentiation coming out of this. And that ability to integrate, that speed of engineering and that depth of engineering, really shows not only in vSphere 7, but also, which was Project Pacific, but also Project Tanzu and that cloud native base that we're driving towards.
So what do you see as the next couple of initiatives? What's coming next?
I see edge and distributed edge being absolutely massive. One of the companies that we worked with is a large retail organization, and they needed a pretty small footprint in most of their stores, but they had 1,100 stores, and we were able to develop a distributed environment for them that ended up being about 3,600 nodes and really is assisting them with some of their agility and some of the newer offerings that they can that they're working on to pull, not only more things from online vendors, but bringing more people into the stores for some differentiated reasons, whether it's online returns done for other vendors directly in their stores, which pulls people in, which I think is massive. I think we're going to continue to see cloud-based operations, maybe not as much focused on in the cloud. We have to remember that when we talk about the cloud, we're still talking about our stuff running on somebody else's gear. It is a colo. It's just got a different type of orchestration and automation stack that differentiates it. But I think we're going to see people to continue to drive more towards that OpEx, that operational efficiency, but it's going to be hybrid. It's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be leverage what's best about the cloud providers, but also leverage what's best about the cloud providers in the data center. Give people the freedom, the speed to do what they're used to doing now. When they go to a portal and swipe a card and spin up a machine, it's going to be on-prem rather than at the hyperscaler location. That's going to provide a tremendous amount of agility. Going to see a lot with IoT in the distributed edge. The data explosion is real and it's coming, in storing that data and being able to monetize the data, analyze it and work with it. Also going to be massive with the depth of solutions that we're seeing alongside some of these practical solutions, things like video surveillance, having, NAS type Isilon based storage that's attached directly to these clusters. So you can, move that cold video storage onto something that's a little bit more, cheap and deep, and then have the retrieval process and the recall process, handled by something like a VxRail. There's a lot of things that are going to evolve, but it's really going to be, continued evolution around, what we're doing. We're seeing a lot of AI ML. We've been seeing it exposed a good deal in research, but we're seeing a lot of businesses that are really, adopting AI ML as a way to get more targeted and more sniper focused on their customers and customer types and where they can be most effective. I love seeing some of the outcomes that are coming out of research, things like targeted medicine and micro studies. And we're starting to look at data much differently, and we're starting to address very specific criterion and very specific outcomes with data utilization. So I think the analytics space is going to continue to explode and grow, but it's also going to be, like I said, with a huge weight of data that's going to be generated. I think somebody said that we're going to be, within the next 5 years, every human on the planet is going to be creating 1.5 megabytes of data a second. That's an awful lot of data for us to figure out, what to do with, to analyze and to drive outcomes on. So those are a couple of areas that I see as still that emerging piece, and kind of where I see the landscape over the next year, 18 months.
Right. All right. We're coming up at the end of our time here. Did you have any final thoughts you wanted to throw in? A question that I may have forgotten to ask? Anything like that?
No, I mean, I think we hit a large number of topics. I want to say thank you. I appreciate the time, spending the time with you and running through. And if there's anything that I can do to assist you and your team, or assist any of the customers who run through this with further information or a larger conversation, always happy to have it, always available. But I appreciate the partnership with Anexinet, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your customers.
All right. Chris Laffey, Dell Technologies. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris.